and bike facilities. So moderators, raise your hands. There's Nick Gross, Polina, Russ, and Amy. We all work on different projects at Kittleson, largely focused on ped bike and other elements. And each of them will be leading your group that is assigned by the cards. And if you don't have a card, which I think we got all of you cards, just find Nick and he will assign you a stakeholder. So the objective of this process, of this workshop, is to understand what the process is for roadway planning, to kind of get a better sense of what stakeholders are usually showing up, and then think more about how we can make decisions around trade-offs and how we can use conflicting stakeholder input in a way that helps make sure that stakeholders feel heard and also creates a roadway that just benefits everybody who wants to use it. And so just for background, Pleasantville is an imaginary city in Oregon. We don't want to call out any specific cities. This is, it's getting repaved, which is a really common way we're allowed to do roadway reconfiguration projects, because if the paint is going to have to go down somewhere, we can put it in a way that better aligns with the current goals. And so here's what we know. Main Street is a major arterial that is a couplet that goes through downtown of a smaller city in Oregon. This is a really common situation that we have because that's kind of, the city is built up around the road that got people to the city and around the city, and now people are wanting to walk around, bike around, across the street, and it's harder. So there's competing interests. Main Street connects so it connects to Pleasantville, Oregon. It is a city-owned roadway, which can make things a little bit easier when we're thinking about kind of temporary installations and different things like that, but we'll talk about that in the presentation. This project is intended to be a safety and a multimodal project, and the requirement under the scope that we're all going to be following is that we improve the pedestrian and bicycle streetscape. We make things safer for all users, but we still meet mobility standards that are set by the city. And the background is also that there's been several established and adopted planning documents that call for the better walking and biking facilities that we'll lean on today. So your challenge is you're a stakeholder and a planner. Very exciting, congratulations. And so we're going to think about what we want the downtown area to look like in 20 years. And so feel free to think outside the box. The workshop will start by establishing goals. We'll really lean on that goal development and how we're kind of messaging the project to each other. Then there will be alternatives development where we'll pick some lovely cross-sections that each of our moderators will have for you. Public involvement will be an opportunity for the different groups to talk to each other about what they want and what they don't want in the roadway. Then we will refine and select, because your moderators are also the city council, and then we'll see if your project goes through to adoption. And so with that, we have a kind of short session for the amount that we're doing. So we're going to split you all up into your groups. There are 3 groups. Group 1 is the more vehicular focused group. You have people who want to make sure we're keeping parking, want to make sure we're not increasing congestion. So if you're group 1, you will be finding Nick Gross, and you'll be kind of over in this area. So you can start finding your way. Group 2, you are the ped bike activists. You might be a parent with young children, or you might be just a gung-ho avid cycler. You're going to be in that back corner with Polina. And then lastly, if you're group 3, you're going to be with Russ, and you're going to be emergency department, fire department, and maintenance, which are 3 really big stakeholders that show up to our projects to make sure they're realistic, they're implementable, they support emergency needs. So you'll follow Russ to that corner in the back.
I'm going to put these up here.
You want chairs?
We can grab it. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can't hear me, clap. Good job. Okay, one more time. If you hear me, clap once. If you hear me, clap twice. Okay. Thanks, Sandra, for the tip. All right, so the exercise now is reporting back from each group on our goals and what alternatives we like the most. Correct, Amy?
Yes, and which ones you really hate.
And which ones we really dislike or hate. The word hate. Okay, so I am representing group 1. We had a combination of restaurant owners, vehicular commuters. We had a business owner. He owned a hat store. And then we had some pretty awesome local business and restaurants. So we are primarily interested in serving our local businesses, and of course that is really best served through people driving to our businesses. And we care a lot about parking because really the more cars equals more business. And people need to drive to our stores and park there. So parking is essentially our highest priority. We also want to make sure that people are not just driving to our downtown, but driving through downtown. And we really want to make sure that there is no congestion on our streets. We also believe generally that bike lanes around town, not on this corridor, but the other bike lanes are not used, and they're probably not needed on this street that we're talking about today. We actually think that a parallel route would be a much better option for people biking.
And for maintenance.
So I mentioned parking. Parking, again, is really key to our goal setting. And we have a lot of us drive big trucks. We want big spaces. And we like parking a lot. I think that covers generally our goals. Now I'll just cover a little bit on the cross sections we like. So if you're still holding the cross sections, with maybe no surprise, we're very supportive of all the cross sections generally on the left side of your page. Our favorite cross section is cross section A. And we believe that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we like 3 lanes. And we also like the fact that there is parking still with that alternative. I already mentioned the parallel route. That's something that we think is missing from the alternatives here that could be further explored. And we also like option A because it's really, it has some really wide lanes. And we like wide lanes because freight provides deliveries to our local businesses. And it's also a lot easier to correct your vehicle in a wide lane when you're texting. So you can kind of just like swerve a little bit more in a 14-foot lane when you're on your cell phone.
It's safer.
It's safer for driving. Yeah, it's much safer. And I think the last thing I'll say, just back to some of the alternatives that we also support. So alternative C, we like alternative C. We think the Sharrow is a bad idea because bikes just shouldn't be in the road. So we would pivot away from the Sharrow, but keep the 3 lanes, parking on both sides. We like that. And then one other alternative would be to introduce angled parking to any of these cross sections, because again, if we can fit more parking in, then we'll be happy.
What's that?
Angled parking.
Angled. I thought you said ankle. Okay.
Angled.
I was like, oh no, new term for me. Okay.
Angled parking. And
Thank you.
and I will actually stop talking. So we just don't like the cross sections on the right side of your sheet. We really don't like options H, G, or E. And if we had to pick one of them, we'd probably go with F because it has parking on both sides, but we'd like to replace that bike lane with just another through lane for cars. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Nick. Nick, I think that our goals for this project could not be more different. So, because I represent our bicycling and pedestrian community who really likes active transportation modes and who have kids and then want to travel on this corridor with their kids and get access to your businesses. And so sorry, I should talk closer. So some of the goals that we have is primarily, unlike you mentioned, like getting people through the downtown. We really want the downtown to be a thriving community for a lot of people. So we want it to be a place where we can create placemaking and wayfinding. We really want to provide physical separation for people walking and biking because a lot of us do have kids and we want to travel on this corridor with our children, and we want to feel safer when doing that. We would like to reduce speed because we think that 30 miles an hour is a little bit too fast for this busy business environment. But it is very important to us to maintain access. That's why parking, we agree with you that parking should be maintained. On this corridor to some extent, because sometimes we don't always bike with our children. Sometimes we want to drive, and it will be convenient to be able to park. We would like to reduce overall feel of traffic stress when traveling on this corridor. I guess bigger picture, we would love to have a corridor that has no injuries or any deaths related to traffic. So, with that in mind, we kind of are. Our voting was actually the opposite of yours. So we do not accept by any means any of the alternatives on the left-hand side. They just truly do not provide safer facilities, or in option D, even though it does provide a safer bicycling facility, it doesn't provide the parking for those of us who have children. Option E, we also do not support it because we think it just doesn't make sense to allocate that much space to, to the buffer and the bike lane, and we'd rather see that space be used for the sidewalks. So our favorite alternative of the three is option G, because it provides a wide facility for people biking. It provides greenery because we do want to see more greenery in this corridor. And option EF is something we would consider as well, but with a little asterisk that we would like to add trees on it as well. So for example, on the left-hand side, we would like to keep parking at some places, but sometimes maybe every 50 or 100 feet, we remove a few parking spots and we place some trees instead. And with option H, we would also accept that, but we would like to flip parking and move parking to the other side of the road so that parking provides separation for people walking. And on option G, ideally, we would also like to flip parking to the other side. Thank you.
So I represent Group 3, which is maintenance and fire. So our group was primarily fire with one or two maintenance people, and really I think one of our goals out of that is our maintenance department is very, very small. So we can't buy any new equipment. Whatever equipment we have, we need to maintain. We're just going to pass everything once. We just don't have the budget. You need to pay us more.
You're not getting my tax dollars.
Yeah, that sounds right. We need to maintain enough space for a ladder truck, and when your building's burning down, you don't want to necessarily see lower speed. And so whatever speeds are necessary for us to get to your building that might be burning up. We'd like to maintain access to businesses, local properties. I think we recognize that curb-tight parking is a reality in America, but if we had to start from scratch, we'd probably remove as much of it as possible. We see too many of you folks parking in front of fire hydrants, and it's really a problem. And we don't want to do any handwork with maintenance. No hand striping everything from a truck. Again, we really have a small maintenance budget. We're stretched quite thin. So those are our kind of overarching and more specific goals. And from that, I think we really like options B and options E the most. We like E primarily because we're not opposed to biking in any sense, and this allows us space to get a vehicle close to the curb. There's plenty of space. There's not going to be any obstructions. We don't really like the hatched buffer striping. That's just too much money. We can't really do that. We really are not fans of F or G. We could potentially get a fire truck, maybe in a 10-foot bike lane, but then if you throw in a tree, you're not going to have any mirrors anymore, and it's going to be kind of a problem. And F has similar problems where you're pretty tight on space. We were maybe okay with C just because it's minimal maintenance. So, but we're ambivalent on D and F, or D and H. We have some things we like, some things we don't like, but yeah. Is that fair, I think?
Well, I mean, D is, that bike lane behind the
Oh, yeah.
raised curb is going to be really tough to maintain. We don't have a sweeper that can get in there, so I don't know how we're going to maintain that.
Yeah. Really light curves, the mountable curves or hill curves are preferred over larger planters, sure.
How about a bicycle facility at the level of the sidewalk? So it would be the same effort to maintain that as if we maintain the sidewalk.
No bike lanes. Yeah.
As long as you build the sidewalk and the bike lane to the same standard as the interstate, so our fire trucks can drive on it with those. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That idea.
There's a mountable curb scenario that if you can demonstrate that the sweeper can get up on it and still have the suction that it needs, then that might be a possibility.
You don't have to maintain bike lanes if you don't have them.
You know what, that's a really
I
good
can,
point.
I can make any curb, a mountable curb in my Jeep, so that's right.
This is a town in Oregon, so everybody does have a Subaru. Well, great. We're going to split back up into our groups. As we could hear, we have very competing interests from each of the groups. We're going to have to do something because now the no change is off the table. Just because of all the prior planning documents, we're going to have to do something, and it's going to have bike facilities. So,
Can you tell me about the political will of City Council?
yeah, Vision Zero was implemented. They're really excited about. I did not say that, but now I am saying it. Vision Zero has been implemented, and this area is a high crash corridor, so safety is really big. So, whatever you can get from City Council.
Okay.
Yeah. So, great. So we're going to split back up into each of our groups. So go back to wherever you started, and we're going to have alternative refinement. So we're going to look back. This is your opportunity if you want to really recommend one that you think each of the groups will be okay with, and tell your city councilor.
I was provided from Amy, from a maintenance perspective, is that the community, that what's important, Pleasantville, they only see that it's important to have 2 through lanes. It's not vital to maintain 3 through lanes. The thinking, of course, is that if there's some sort of emergency, such as a fire, it would be nice to be able to have space for a 3rd lane to get more throughput, more people out in a quick amount of time. And so with that thinking, we sort of shifted to the priorities more on the right side of the sheet, really looking, more honing in specifically on E, F, and H. Yes. So, and that's all I'll say until others go.
Our bike advocate group had considered all of the concerns that other city council members have, and we think that F would probably be the option we would be most comfortable with, but we would like to make some modifications. For example, as money becomes available, we would like to remove the parking on the left-hand side sorry, on the right-hand side next to the bicyclist, and distribute those 8 feet by adding more, making the sidewalks wider, so increasing sidewalks to 9 feet, and also adding an extra space for the bike lane buffer. Therefore, having a wider buffer space, we feel like we wouldn't have to have the vertical separation to improve, to make it easier for the maintenance folks, and to address some of the concerns that vehicular community has. We believe that removing bicycles from the street to another street or not providing bicycle facilities at all will not be beneficial, because for one, if you don't have facilities, people are still going to bike, and they're going to hold up traffic, and they're going to make it more difficult for people driving, trying to get through this corridor. But if you remove and place them on a parallel bike route, we are just going to boycott all of the businesses on this corridor. We're not going to go shopping. So for us, having access to the street will be crucial to coming there and shopping in your businesses and providing you with those money to keep your businesses going. So option F, but as money becomes available, we'd like to modify it.
I don't know where to start. Well, we all live in Pleasantville because we like Pleasantville as it is. And as I said before, we don't believe cyclists are fit or belong on this corridor. We do understand, and we have adopted some silly policies, one called Vision Zero, which I think when I adopted it, I thought it meant envision zero cyclist, which is why we want them on the parallel route. The other thing about Vision Zero is really about safety, and as I mentioned earlier, safety for vehicles just means wider lanes, and that provides us more flexibility in driving. So it does sound like providing bicycle access on this road is something that we need to do. We did have 2 alternatives that came to mind, and then we will potentially settle on one that's on the sheet here. But the 2 alternatives that came to mind, so the idea here is there are these bike stencil things called sharrows that are painted in the travel lane, and we thought, can we just put the sharrows on the sidewalk so that instead of sharing the travel lane with cars, we can just have people walking and biking together, which is much safer than mixing with traffic and cars, right? So we thought, it's a pretty innovative idea. We thought we could just put the sharrows on the sidewalk and have a mixing zone there. The other idea we had is to potentially, if needed, narrow up some of the travel lanes and just widen the sidewalk into kind of the same idea with the sharrow and the pedestrians, making that space a little bit wider than 6 feet if they need that. So that's an alternative as well. So the one alternative on the sheets here, we very much like alternative C still, the sharrows. We can put the bikes on the sidewalk. We can stripe it and sign it so that everyone knows that that's where they belong. But we also would like to potentially add angled parking, as I mentioned earlier. So after hearing the opinions from our other counselors and the public, I suppose we could potentially settle on a modification of figure F. I think we would like to see angled parking there. We could probably narrow up that bike lane to 3, maybe 4 feet. And that way we could fit in our angled parking desires. And apparently we were told by the consultant that traffic is only going to increase by, I think it was roughly 10% in year 2040. We obviously don't believe in any of this hocus pocus modeling, but it sounds like it would be somewhat acceptable. I don't really know what any of that means, but it sounds like a small delay. So, end of the day, as I've already said, we think bikes are best off on the sidewalk. If they need to be on the road, we suppose we could get away with like a pretty narrow 3 to 4 foot bike lane on option F with angled parking. Thank you.
Well, Nick, I have bad news for you. Unfortunately, per the standards of our state that we live in, we cannot provide a parking that is 3 or 4 feet wide. And so you can't go below 5 feet at all. So with that in mind, you don't have space to fit your angle parking.
Can we put the bikes on a path, a 6-foot path with people walking?
No, we cannot, because that also violates the standards of our state. That is too narrow. 8 feet would be the minimum we'd go for, and given how busy this corridor is for people shopping and people walking and biking, we really would not be able to do less than 10 or 12 feet shared use path.
Okay, well, that's news to me. I guess we might be comfortable. You said 5 feet is the minimum for the bike lane. I think if we narrowed up to 5 feet on option F and introduced angled parking, I think my vehicular friends, I'm seeing some nods out there. We might, yep, I think we're okay with that. So my vote, no buffer. Yeah, the parking lane is enough of a buffer.
We're going to call it
A vote. Okay.
Does someone have a motion?
I have a motion. I propose, and I'm looking at my group just to confirm this, that we go with option F if we remove the parking lane on the right side of the road and make the bikes and buffer space slightly larger to accommodate emergency vehicles.
Great. Do I have a second?
Are we voting?
Great, thank you to our city councilors. So now we're going to talk a little bit about a real life example. Thank you. What? So the project was approved. There was a mix of what was recommended, but depending on the different corridors, and the project was also phased because some streets had more support than other streets. So there's a variety of different things we employed to help move the project forward, but a lot of the concerns that we heard from different groups and that you saw on your cards are real concerns by the community. And we had a very funny gun-ho motorist group, but in general, people in each of the different groups have different desires, and so it's really important to think about their goals, listen to what they want, and think about how can you shape a project to be able to meet those goals. So what we heard on our theoretical project was that the fire department and the public were really concerned about removing a travel lane because of extreme weather events, forest fires, and being able to evacuate the community. In general, there wasn't a lot of congestion. We were able to support that we were meeting mobility standards now and in the future. So I think really speaking to the community, letting them know we heard, and creating an option that had the ability for emergency responders to utilize the bike ped facility, make it wide enough that they could use that, we're able to get a lot more support that way. We did focus a lot on education, helping people understand what the benefits are of multimodal improvements, speaking to the business owners and the local restaurants about just the studies and the backgrounds that show that having bike ped facilities increases funding for businesses. And so pulling up some of those statistics in your back pocket can help with that and help get city councilors supportive of those types of projects. We quantified the vehicular impacts. In some projects, we don't do that, we start with the baseline that we will remove parking. Sometimes we get what the utilization is of parking and understand, can parking be removed from one side of the road? Other times, if we're removing a lane, having those vehicular impacts is really important. What I heard at a session yesterday from the city of Vancouver is that they then also do a year-long study afterwards. And so sometimes something like incremental phasing, having something temporary, and then seeing how the public responds to it can be really valuable in getting the public to see what changes. I think sometimes modeling vehicular impacts can be really difficult because of induced demand, which is basically the concept where if you build it, they will come. So there will still be traffic. And I think we model with a consistent growth rate, but 20 years in the future, we're hoping people shift to multimodal. So using graphics is also really helpful. You were all looking at different graphics. They're very easy to make on Street Mix to be able to compare different things. Sometimes we'll go a step further and model it on a real image so people can really envision what it would look like to have that implemented in their community. Being flexible, so we changed some of the alternatives a little bit. We had some give and take from the different groups. That can be really valuable. And then the big one is really engage your ped bike community. So people are more likely to show up in opposition to a project, especially in the virtual world. It's really easy to participate in an online open house. So I think it's really important to tailor the questions to understand what the concerns are about the project so that you can make sure you're listening and modifying in a way that really supports the goals of the community, but also is letting the people who are in opposition understand that they're being heard and that they also still have a voice. So on our project, we had about 700 online survey responses, which on a bike ped project is almost unheard of. And 70% of them voted for a no-build option. There were some really aggressive comments in the comment boxes that we read through. Some of them were from the same IP address, so there was definitely people in there submitting multiple responses against the project with almost the same text in the comment boxes. But it was really disheartening. The project almost didn't move forward after seeing that because even though 210 people showed up in support of the project, there was really strong opposition. The Downtown Association hosted another survey. Several different groups wrote letters of support to their counselors and were able to show more support for a build option, really leverage the networks, and the project was able to go forward through phasing. Yes? Yes.
So then they did the survey because the city was there was more political support, right? So the city was willing to do an extra survey
Yes.
to counter what they knew was biased feedback.
Yes.
Basically. Okay.
In this particular case, it was a radio show host who, shared it, but the Public Works Department, the Maintenance Department, the City Council was generally supportive of the project, but it's really hard to move forward when you're not having the people who want the project show up. We also had an in-person open house, and that open house was a lot more supportive. And so I think there's a little bit of challenges with going to the virtual environment, but these were some of the takeaways. And just as bike ped advocates, it's really important to show up for the projects that you support and to get your friends and family to come as well. So
if the city wasn't supportive of this, it would have died potentially because of that first, right? That first survey result. Yeah.
Did they ever offer like a temporary trials setup to where you could do some paint and some movable baller type things or stuff like that to do some just, hey, let's see how it works. Give the people a chance to experience a change or something like that. And because I've seen a lot of situations where they'll do that and they say, hey, yeah, this works pretty good, you know. And sometimes that's a nice way to kind of break things in.
yeah, for this project in particular, we did not do that, but for a different project that we worked with Jenna on, we did end up with a parallel route. We are running into ODOT is requiring the bike facilities on their roadways, and so having it is really powerful because then you can tell the people who are anti-adding bikes to a roadway, that it is required that it will happen, and you can't just put them on a parallel facility. But for this specific facility, we went with a slightly higher stress facility that isn't buffered on the ODOT facility because you had to maintain the same curb-to-curb width for freight, and there were other challenges with that. And we had the low-stress facility on a parallel route with things called traffic diverters, which prevents it being used from a through route for cars. And we were able to kind of create a short-term and a long-term plan. The short-term did have some temporary installations, and maybe afterwards you can ask Jenna how it's going so far. I don't know if you've heard from the city, but
You can ask.
I just also wanted to touch on Jenna's comment as well. So back to the public involvement and it was kind of a pretty pivotal point in this project when we did our first big virtual outreach and got an overwhelming response of people against this project. And it was not only that the city was supportive of the project in general, but it was so obvious that a certain population had been tapped in this community by somewhat of a influential figure, in this case a radio show host, who was able to broadcast his opinion and already had somewhat of an established following going, and really leaned on these people to chime into the virtual open house. So the city recognized that. It was not just that they were supportive of the project. The city took a very fair stance on the feedback that was heard. I think this was just, it was very clear the city, I'm gonna go ahead and say the city name. It's the city of Medford, Oregon. They're doing a lot of great work. They're doing a lot of road reconfigurations. This same person has been sort of fighting against these types of projects there for a while, so none of this was unfamiliar to them. So the point being, we got a lot of somewhat biased opinions from one group. The city, as well as our project team, then also made a second effort to reach the populations and people that I think probably thought everything was all good and dandy, our bike ped advocates who had showed up to some of our earlier meetings and supported the project. But we wanted to let them know that it never hurts to continue to support and chime in. Question.
How can you justify discounting, even if it is in that context, some public feedback? Because if it had been a radio show host for some other, let's say a bike ped radio show host, would you discount that as well?
Yeah, so it was not discounted. We were very transparent to council and to the public about that feedback. We presented the exact same numbers that Amy showed to council and said that, if whatever it was, 70% of the responses were against the project. We also made it clear that it was a little bit of a numbers game. Instead of saying 30%, it's 200 and something people were supportive of this as well, and also provided a little bit of background context. But we did not hide the numbers. We did not hide the input that we got at all, and we did not discount it. I think we were very transparent in the input that was received.
And we also read all 700 comments, and we looked at the common concerns that they were having. Some of it was congestion, and we responded with the operations findings that it was meeting the mobility standards that were adopted by the city council already. And we also looked at, again, that kind of emergency response concern. And so I think, again, making sure that you're, not discounting the 70% who don't like the project, but trying to find out why. And even if we're not going to tailor our whole project to that group, how can we make sure we're helping them feel heard? I think that's time. So thank you all for coming and for participating. This was really fun to hear all of your thoughts and experiences as well. So good luck at your meeting.
That was good. Yeah, that was good. It's good. Kind of eye-opening to be on the inside of that. Yeah, it is, especially taking on a role that all of us